Hi, I'm Scott Houston, and this is Learning with Power. And this is episode 19, and this episode basically is going to deal with the solution. So the solution for how we can get America to be more like what my proposal for Herzerjat was going to be. And like I said, that to me is the most ideal government to have in modern times. So how do we move America toward that? And the solution is campaign finance reform, and that is the solution, and that is the only solution and the most important solution. And every time I talk about this on social media, whatever, everybody says, well, yeah, okay, that and border, increase border things, or yeah, that, or LGBT stuff, or well, yeah, that and abortion stuff. Well, yeah, that. I mean, everybody's got their own personal peeve or their own personal project or their own personal issue that they feel is just the most important thing in the whole world, and they always want to attach that to this. And I'm like, no. Because that's why Occupy movement was not successful. It wasn't successful because it had no clear agenda. It had no plan, it had no leader, it had no agenda. You ask these people, what do you want? Why are you protesting? What are you trying, what statement are you trying to make? And they had no answer. And everybody had a different answer. And they would just look like a bunch of young people that were being disgruntled because they weren't, they didn't have enough money or something. They were forced out of their mommy and daddy's home at age 25, and now they didn't have enough money, and life was hard, and they were angry about it. That's what it seemed like it was about. So how do we move America toward the ideal government? Well, with corporations in power, it's going to be very difficult. But theoretically, the way that it can be done is a way that it has been done before, and that is through peaceful protests. And that's what Martin Luther King proposed. If we do what Martin Luther King does, and if we follow the example that Martin Luther King Jr. established, then we can have a new movement, like the Occupy movement, only this time with one clear agenda, which would be campaign finance reform. Another person that used nonviolent protests, peaceful protests, is a guy named Gandhi. And he liberated an entire country with that method. So it can be done. Also, we have the advantage now of things going viral. So that's something that Gandhi didn't have in his time. So when people were being beat up or shot at or whatever by the British Army or the British government, they couldn't, it was hard to really prove that or make that known internationally. But anything like that happens, if the cops suddenly come in the billy clubs and they just start beating the crap out of everybody for doing the Occupy movement or doing a movement like this, then you can just film that, and that can immediately go viral, and then the whole world will react to that, and they'll say, oh, look, the United States is not what it professes that it stands for, because it's supposed to say that you're allowed to have freedom of assembly, and these people are assembling and they're getting beat up for it. And that will happen. People will, that the government will crack down really badly, especially now, because actually we're very much losing, because of social media, actually we're very much losing freedom of speech. And this is largely being driven, I have to say, by women. Women control social media, they dominate social media, and they're the ones who complain the most if somebody isn't actually conforming to their worldviews. So to give you an example, there was a recent event that happened. Harrison Butker, who's a place kicker for the world champion Kansas City Chiefs, and he's a very good place kicker, and he makes a very good salary, and he should, because he's a very valuable player. He was asked to speak at a college graduation recently, and he completely got lambasted for everything that he said, and the Chiefs got bombarded with all of these demands to have Butker be cut from the team because he doesn't think the way that they want to think. They said that he was uneducated and a misogynist and whatever. And all he was doing was he was just, from his heart, expressing his own personal views and his own personal opinions about how people can be happy. And he was just saying that, you know, in the media, he wasn't saying anything illegal or anything, you know, wasn't, and they were saying, oh, this is an offense to women everywhere, he's being offensive. He wasn't saying anything bad about women. He wasn't saying that women can't do things or shouldn't try to do things or whatever. He was just saying that the media today is influencing women in such a way that deciding to be a homemaker and deciding to be a live-at-home mom and raising your children and throwing yourself into raising your children is like no longer considered to be an admirable thing. And so women are wanting to do it less and less and less and less. This is a problem in Japan. Japan, they have a huge problem now with population decline. Women are not wanting to have families anymore in Japan. And even though the government is heavily incentivizing that they should do this, so, I mean, literally in Japan, if a woman decided to be a homemaker, she could actually make as much or more money than she could at like most regular jobs. But they would rather be a cashier at a sushi place rather than be a stay-at-home mom, just because social media wants women to feel like they need to be all that they can be, and that deciding to be a stay-at-home mom anymore is no longer an honorable thing. And he was just saying that from his personal experience, when his wife decided to just forget about all that stuff and just focus on having a family and being a mother, she just became so much happier. And a lot of women are like that. You know, a lot of women like being moms. They want to be moms. They get a lot of fulfillment out of being a mom and then eventually a grandmom and from their families. To deny them that opportunity to make that choice, to say that's bad, you know, is a problem. And he was saying it was evil. It's not evil. It's just something that, you know, you're having an overcorrection now. And you know, you have to still say that, you know, it's still an honorable thing to do, to choose to be a housewife. And Harrison Butker's wife is unusually privileged to be able to do that, because it used to be in the 1960s, a man could support an entire family, wife and kids, with one income. And even if that job was just like as a shoe salesman, so like if you look at Married with Children, which is from the 80s and 90s, and Al Bundy, you know, he was a shoe salesman. I guess the series was contrived in the 60s, but in the 60s you could do that. You could be a shoe salesman and support an entire family. You cannot do that anymore. Now both parents must work. And this is what corporations want. Corporations want that. They want more people in the workforce, and they want to have their thumb on more people. And so that's a problem, because we're not having complete families anymore. Children are not being raised by their parents as much anymore. And this is all going to have very, very negative consequences. And ultimately, if we're no longer allowed to say our opinion about things, and so if they cut Harrison Butker because, God forbid, he said it might be a good idea, some women might be happier if they would stay at home, and he loses his job because of that, his high-paying job because of that. I mean, that's what I mean by tyranny by the masses. That's exactly what that is. He's not falling he's not conforming with what social media says he must think like this, and if he doesn't, oh, well, my son isn't going to, I don't want my son to look up to a guy like that, you know, oh, he should not be in a job like that if he doesn't think the way he's supposed to think. That is tyranny by the masses, and that's taking away freedom of speech. And when you take away freedom of speech, as I pointed out before, you ultimately lose the ability to recall a rogue leader, like they have in Russia, for example. And if you don't have the ability to recall a rogue leader in some way, and we can kind of do that in America still, but not really, it's getting to be less. But you know, if you can't, if conforming like in North Korea means you're not allowed to say, I don't like him, he's not doing a good job, he should be removed. Oh, you're going to be sent to a work camp. That's what happens in North Korea. They do not have the ability to say, this guy is not a good leader. Nobody is allowed to say that. Literally, they're not allowed to say that. So that's what you get with tyranny by the masses. If you no longer have freedom of speech. So freedom of speech means some people have different opinions. Some people have different ideas. And that's okay. And you just have to deal with that and learn to cope with that. And maybe talk to your psychiatrist about it on Wednesdays. But you're going to have to just deal with that, because that means everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and that's okay. That's called democracy, equality. That's how new ideas get out, and that's how we avoid dictatorships. If you have tyranny by the masses because you're no longer allowed to say stuff in a speech, for example, then you no longer have freedom of speech, and then you will have tyranny eventually. You will have tyranny. That's the alternative. Okay. And the thing is that the other thing I was going to point out too was that there's the problem is that with a lot of people is there's a lot of gray areas. It's not all black. It's not all white. It's not one or the other. This has to do with something. I'll address one thing that was commented on one of my posts, apparently on one of my broadcasts. Somebody said Cleopatra is black because if you have one drop of black, then you're black. Well, that's just an ignorant and stupid thing to say. And somebody else said, oh, races were invented in the 1600s. And if races don't exist, then how can anybody be a racist? Hitler wasn't a racist because races don't exist, right? It's a fantasy that was invented, right? Obviously, races do exist, and there are very distinctive differences between them, just by appearance. And if you travel the world, you'll notice there's races. There are very distinctive races in different parts of the world. So if you say, oh, well, 1% or one drop means that you're black, well then, I mean, almost all of us then are black. I mean, more now than there was. In Cleopatra's day, the races were actually a lot more distinctive and a lot more well-defined. Today, they're mixed a lot more. You know, Brazil, the phenomenon of what's happening in Brazil, when you've got a lot of mixture now, didn't happen 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. That wasn't happening at that time. They were all Indians then. So like this 23andMe, this DNA thing, now that has some legitimate reasons for that. And my sister tried to get it done because she wanted to find out about heredity, diseases that were in our family, whatever. She learned nothing about that. But what she was insulted. Because it's obviously a very liberal organization, and either you're a white person and it shows up that you have somebody is black in your family, in your DNA, or they will insult you and say, you're a 5% Neanderthal. And the stigma about Neanderthals is that they were dumb and stupid and inferior, which actually we're finding they were not at all. But yeah, most white Europeans have Neanderthal DNA. And so if you don't have any black in you, then they would say, oh, well, you have Neanderthal. Which, I mean, it's not even relevant. I mean, that has nothing to do with diseases that run in your family. That's 60,000 years ago. So we're going back like maybe 2,000 years, you know, but then they're talking about Neanderthals, which is 60,000 years ago. It's just done for the purpose of insulting people. The intention is to insult white people. The whole website is all about insulting white people. So, I mean, you can subscribe to that if you want, but I'm just saying that's what that's about. But in Cleopatra's time, the races were very distinctive. And what science doesn't really know, and what we haven't really determined yet, is when did the races become distinguished as they are? Because you can't travel around Asia or Japan or China or Korea and walk around and say that those people are the same as white people or black people. They're not. You can't walk around Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and look at everybody who is just black as coal and say that they're the same race as white people. I mean, you can't. I mean, yeah, they're very distinctive. You can't walk around Scandinavia and say that they're the same as black people, because they're not. You know, first of all, they're all taller. You know, races exist. You know, and that's just the way there is. But we don't know when it happened or when it became when they became distinguished. We just know that it was so. And because we can't pinpoint exactly when in history that evolved, or why it even evolved exactly, you were left to just kind of theories or whatever. But the bottom line is it does exist, and 2,000 years ago it was even more distinctive than it is today. So, and because today you've got so much mixing that when you say 1% or one drop makes you black, most everybody in that case is black. You know, 90% of the population, you know, is probably black in that case, you know. So, I mean, that's just ignorance. And that's what I mean about gray. You know, there's gray. And there's gray areas. And anybody that's a fanatical anything, whether you're a fanatical Christian and you're a hardline, conservative, biblical, you know, Christian, or you're a radical Muslim, or you're radical anything, that's just ignorance. Because life is not one or the other. Life is gray. Life is a gray area. So when George W. Bush said, "You're either with me or against me," that was a very ignorant thing for him to say. Now, I don't know if that means he himself has a low IQ, or if he was just told to say that because the average population has a low IQ. I don't know. But that was an ignorant thing to say. Life is gray. And that's why we have to have a more sophisticated government system than we have. Okay. So I think those are the main two things. I was going to talk about the Moors also. Okay, so along those lines of race, somebody had mentioned something about the Moors. And they said that the Moors were black. Well, they're called the Black Moors. But they were not black people. They were like Middle Eastern Arab-looking people. Because what happened in like 700 AD, when the Muslims took over the Middle East, they very aggressively marched, you know, militarily, and so it was a military organization as much as anything else. And they marched and they ran roughshod over North Africa, because the infrastructure that the Roman Empire had laid out, and even at that point even the Byzantine Empire, was gone. And so there was nothing stopping them. So like the Vikings could just raid northern England or northern Europe and just raid villages and nobody could stop them, so too the Muslims could raid across northern Africa, which they did. And a lot of people were forced to be Muslims. And the ones that didn't become Muslims, actually, a lot of those people ran to like Ethiopia. Ethiopia at that time used to be actually a really beautiful place, a really nice place to live. So, you know, the out of Africa thing, it wasn't like there was this explosion of people and everybody came out of Africa. You've got migration back and forth. Some people migrated into Africa. So a lot of people migrated from the Middle East, from like eastern part of Israel and Jordan and western parts of Saudi Arabia today, and that desert area, and they moved into Ethiopia. And now, you know, that's changed, obviously. The weather has changed, global warming, whatever you want to call it. The Sahara Desert has run over Ethiopia now, and now there's starvation there. But it used to be a really beautiful and a wonderful place to live, and the people there were very kind and accepting, and accepted all these groups that moved in. So, you know, you've got migrations everywhere. Anyway, so the Moors, though, they were Arab, coming from the Middle East. They ran across northern Africa very swiftly, moved across northern Africa, moved through Tunisia, where Septimus Severus is from. A lot of people like to say he was black. He was not black. He was from modern-day Tunisia. That was part of the Roman Empire. He was very much a white person. He looked Italian, just like I said, Claudia, once upon a time in the West. Anyway, that's what she starred in. Claudia Cannavale or something like that. But anyway, she's Italian, but she's from Tunisia. So they ran roughshod over northern Africa. And if you go to northern Africa today, you will see that they're not black, they're Arab. So they ran across northern Africa into Morocco. They film a lot of stuff in Morocco. It poses as like a duplicate for Egypt or anywhere in the Middle East. Looks like Morocco, but Morocco's Africa. Yeah, except that it looks like it's the Middle East. Because they're all Arabs. And those people moved across the Straits of Gibraltar and into Spain. And they ran right through Spain because even the Goths that were around at the time, who were very, very pale, and the Basque who lived in the northern part of Spain at the time, they were very, very pale, very pasty white people. So to them, Arab people looked black. That's why they were called the Black Moors. And today, Alhambra still stands near Granada, a city called Granada in southeastern Spain today. It's not far from Seville. That was their stronghold area, ultimately. But they ran right through Spain and they crossed the Pyrenees, which is where Andorra is and all that. And they moved into France. And then they were stopped in France in the Battle of Tours, I think it was called, the Battle of Tours, by Charles Martel, who I'm actually directly descended from. I can actually prove that. It's not really important, but I'm actually directly grandson descended from Charles Martel. But he stopped them in that battle, and that was the end of the Muslim encroachment into Christian Europe. And then they went forced back over the mountains, back into Spain, and he set up headquarters in Spain. Eventually, they were driven out of Spain in around the 1100s, and then Spain became more European-like. And then it was in the 1400s, mid-1400s, when you have Isabella and King Ferdinand got married, made them both very wealthy, and that's why they financed Columbus, because they had all this, they were flush with all this new money. And so that's kind of the history of Spain. But the Moors are called the Black Moors, but they were not black people. The only way for black people at that time to have gotten into Spain would be if they came from Mali. That was the closest civilization of black people that there was, and they would have had to have crossed the Sahara Desert in order to get to Morocco, because you have to go to Morocco to go across the Straits of Gibraltar, and that would have been impossible with any kind of an army. It just was not feasible to do that. To go across North Africa was easy, because North Africa is, nice, especially near the coast. It's very nice. All along North Africa is very nice. And you go all the way into Morocco. So that's the Moors. Okay, so that's explaining what that is. And so I'm going to be finished with that now. Let's get back to the solution. Okay, so the solution today is campaign finance reform. And the reason why that's the solution and nothing else is, that's the most important thing. And the reason why that's the most important thing is because once you achieve that, and basically campaign finance reform, meaning that you have to eliminate the corruption that exists in America today, which is that corporations finance elections. So ultimately what corporations want is what gets done, because they finance elections. And you really need corporations now to finance an election, because you need like $1 billion to win the presidency now. You have to get funding from corporations in order to do that. It's impossible without their help at this point. So that gives them a tremendous amount of say. Plus they control all the media, and the media controls everybody's mind, and that ultimately controls social media too. Corporations want all these things. If you remove corporations entirely from the political process, and they no longer have a say at all, and all funding is public financed, all elections are publicly financed. When that happens, no longer do you have corruption. No longer do you have corporations being able to control what politicians say. If it's publicly funded, now what becomes most important is what the people want, and how are you going to get the majority of votes. And so no longer do you have these, there are so many things like regarding public health care and education and things like that, where even across both parties, like 85% of the population is polled saying, yeah, they want that. But it doesn't happen because corporations don't want it. And whether it's a left agenda or a right agenda, there's lots of these things where 85% of the people want this, but it will never happen because corporations don't want that. Well, now, all of those things are going to start to happen once the people, you remember the people, have a voice again. And they will have a voice again when you remove corporations entirely from the political process. And it will only happen when you remove money and corporations and corporate influence from the political process. Then you give the voice back to the people again. And then all these other pet projects like the border and LGBT and marijuana or whatever, I mean abortion, whatever you want, whatever you're into, or church, whatever, all that happens once you get rid of money from the equation. You eliminate money from the equation, then what the people want, that gets done. So that's why campaign finance reform is the single most important thing that we should be asking for. And if you have a movement, like an Occupy type movement, and everybody says we want campaign finance reform, we want publicly funded elections, if everybody says the same thing, within a year that will happen. You watch. That will happen. Suddenly, like a miracle, that will happen. Or at least we'll move toward that. Or at least maybe they'll say, well, local elections can be publicly funded, things like that. But we'll move in that direction. And that would be a huge step forward if just local elections, like in your county or something, were publicly funded. That'd be a huge step in that direction. That's why that's the most important thing. Okay, so, as I was saying before, campaign finance reform and having publicly funded elections is actually the most important thing that everybody should be asking for. But actually, corporations intentionally promote all of these other problems to distract people. That they don't want people to be all unified and focused on that idea. They don't want that because that would be a problem. If everybody was demanding that they no longer influence elections, well, then they're going to lose all their power. So they're doing everything they can through the media to make sure that everybody is split apart and everybody has their own little pet project that they want done. They do not want people to be unified all together for one cause. But that's what needs to happen. Everybody needs to be unified together for one cause, which is campaign finance reform. You must remove money from campaigns. And the way you do that is with publicly funded elections, as I explained in the Hazarajat plan. And even if you're a billionaire and you put in your own $500 million or something toward your own election, you're disqualified. So that no longer would be the reason. And how do we find who's going to be our representative? Well, we have tests and things that people can take, and you have to actually do it through merit. You know, you can't just say, oh, he's a darling of corporations, he wins. I mean, if you think about it, you know, Biden versus Trump, come on. We gotta, I mean, it's 300 million people in America. We've got to be able to come up with somebody better than that. I mean, that was the exciting thing about Obama, was he seemed like he was a fresh voice. He seemed like he was something new. Well, you know, Biden and Trump, they're baby boomers. You know, they're born in 1946. Those ideas are gone. Time to move on. You know, but corporations don't want that. They want status quo. That's what they want. So, how can we make this happen? Well, as I said before, peaceful protests. Martin Luther King and Gandhi were very good models to follow in this way. Peaceful protests. You have a new Occupy movement, only this time everybody needs to say campaign finance reform. Publicly funded elections, that's what we need. Otherwise, anything else is corruption. It's blatant corruption. It's blatant pay for legislation. Pay for your favorite political representative. It's literally the definition of corruption. That's why the system doesn't work anymore. That's why the corporations have all the power. And they own all the media, and through all the media they're manipulating everybody's opinions about things. That disappears when you remove that from the equation. I hope we can understand that. Okay, so, and the thing is everybody has their own idea about what's most important. You know, like I said, every time I present this, people are always like, well, yeah, that and this. Well, yeah, that, you know, that's fine, and this. It's because they don't really get it, you know, and then everybody has their own, and everybody thinks they're right. So like all the people in social media that are like, you know, they all think that they're right. And everybody's like, well, I'm in the right because that's what everybody thinks. Everybody knows that. And that's, you know, that's been evolved over time, you know, going with the masses, going with the herds or whatever. That's always the safe way to be and the easiest way to survive. If you try to be the standout, that's not the solution. That's not a good model for survival, actually. It's very difficult, and only very few brave people dare to do that. And so, you know, and everybody's got their own idea of this is, well, this is what I think, so everybody's right. Well, sometimes what happens if everybody is wrong? Somebody has to say, wait a minute, that's wrong. And it shouldn't take thousands and thousands of years, you know. Back when they wrote the Bible, I don't know if you read the Bible much, but it was written in the 4th century. And in the Bible, there's many mentions of slavery. And, you know, who should be a slave and when is it right, you know. I mean, and who are the best slaves and things like that. There's all kinds of talk like that. And obviously, that was wrong. But in those days, we didn't know that. And everybody did it. And everybody thought it was okay. And everybody agreed with that. Well, everybody was wrong. And there was a time when everybody thought the world was flat and that and we know that's wrong now. But everybody used to think that. And it wasn't until Copernicus and Galileo and people like that until finally we decided that it wasn't true anymore. Everybody knows. Anybody that says, well, everybody says, well, I just agree with everybody because everybody knows, those people are not real intelligent. I'm sorry to say, they're not. And they're just going with the crowd. And sometimes everybody and what everybody thinks and what everybody knows is wrong. In fact, a lot of times it's wrong. And so that's why you have to have freedom of speech. You have to be able to say, you have to be able to say, wait a minute, that isn't right. And you have to be allowed to say that without persecution. So Harrison Butker needs to be allowed to give his commencement speech. As long as he doesn't directly insult anybody, it's okay. It should be fine. He should be allowed to do that. Okay, whether you agree with him or you don't agree with him, he should be allowed to do that without any flack or any threat of losing his job. That's just crazy. Okay, so how did we get to this? Why is it that corporations control everything? How did that happen? Well, and in fact, corporations control things all over the world. They control things also in Europe. They control things in India. They have a lot of control in China, except that in China the system is such that the government is stronger than the corporations. And so if the government decides that some corporate leader has gone rogue or something, they can actually give them the death penalty. And they can rein them in, you know, very easily. But in the rest of the world, that's very hard to do. And the reason why the whole world actually is moving in that direction, and so all these things are happening. Like the whole thing about COVID was all about getting rid of customer service. That's what that was all about. It was all about getting rid of customer service, which happened, and it hasn't come back. Because, you know, businesses are constantly looking for ways to make to improve the bottom line. They're looking for ways to cut expenses, and payroll is a huge overhead. And if you're going to have everybody demanding higher minimum wage, you got to get rid of some people, and that's really what that was all about. So they got rid of all the customer service, and we're paying for it because the fundamental flaw worldwide, socioeconomic worldwide, the fundamental flaw is that the stock markets in the world only reward for growth. They do not reward for just still making a profit and everything's the same and if things are fine, and if things are stable, nobody makes any money. You know, I only make money on my stocks if there's growth. If there's not growth, nobody makes any money. And you might say, well, I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite for saying that corporations are bad. Or, when I make money off of stocks. Republicans love to do that to Democrats all the time. They love to say, "Oh, look, this Elizabeth Warren is just a hypocrite because look how much money she and her husband have, or the Clintons, or whatever." Well, of course they have money. You have to have money if you're a politician. Doesn't mean that their message is bad. Doesn't mean that they don't believe in their message. I mean, just because you've got some money and you invested somewhere and you don't have it all shoved in your closet. Doesn't mean that you're evil, Also, CEOs are not evil. It's not like CEOs are the bad people. There's no individual person is the bad person. It's not like you can say, this CEO, he's bad because all he cares about is profits. That's their job. If CEOs were to say, you know what, talk to the board. The CEOs have to answer to a board. And if they said to the board, you know what, we had a pretty good year. I thought this year we would give back. We would give back to the people. Let's give it back. Let's sponsor social programs and things like that. We've got money. We've got plenty of money. We don't need any more. He would be fired. He would be fired immediately. He can't say things like that. He can only say things that say, well, this is the plan for improving growth. That's all he's allowed to say. So every agenda and everything that a corporation tries to do is to create growth somehow. And the problem is we're running out of ways to create growth. And, before, when we had the Industrial Revolution and we had widgets, and then widgets gave way to better widgets, and better widgets gave way to even better widgets than that, and we constantly had new inventions and replacing other inventions, that was fine. And you could always have growth. If you invested in the new product, that was happening, then you were always creating growth that way. But now we're at a point where the internet has eliminated so many businesses and so many jobs, and I'll talk about that actually in the next episode. And iPhones, these things have eliminated so many businesses and so many jobs now that there's a limit to how we can create growth anymore. And that's the problem that we're starting to experience right now economically. That's why things are getting squeezed out, because we are running out of ways to create growth. And when you no longer have ways to create growth, the system is not going to be functional anymore. So somehow, eventually, we have to revise the system and change how stock markets work and how, from a fundamental standpoint, and economists have to get together and decide what's a new way to restructure all these financial systems. Because ultimately, you can't keep going in a direction of growth. It's just not possible. It's just not feasible. And that's really what we're up against. That's what the whole world is up against. That's actually at the root of all of the world's problems, actually, is that fundamental flaw. Okay. So I think that about covers everything that I want to cover. Again, just to recap, if you remove, lobbyists, corporations through lobbyists, and corporations through media that they own, manipulate a lot of things. And lobbyists directly donate to campaigns. And in fact, that's how you have to be a politician, is you have to cater to, you have to curry to or solicit donations from lobbyists, from corporations, in order to have more funding for your campaign in order to win. That is direct corruption. That's corruption in its most purest form. And that's how we are now, because when the system was established in 1787, they didn't understand about the Industrial Revolution and that corporations' private interests would dwarf eventually public interests. They didn't imagine that could ever happen. So if you can completely remove corporate interests from the election process, then what the people want suddenly becomes the most important feature within politics. That's why that's the most important thing to get done. And then everything else that you want to do can fall in line after that. Anything else that you want to do can happen after that, because now, then the people will once again have a voice. The people will then again control. And that's the end of my lesson. So please remember to like or share or to subscribe. And this is Learning with Power, and I'm Scott Powers Houston. Stay tuned for the next episode, and I'll talk more about how the iPhone has ruined the world. And we'll see you then. Take care.